Welcome everyone to our webcast, Group Policy Preferences, and Third-Party Solutions. Today we're going to be talking about best practices in managing configurations and delivering applications. Hopefully you're in the right place. You're probably an IT administrator who's concerned about how to best use these methods to deliver applications and manage your user configurations. My name is Jayson Gehri. I'm with Quest Software. You may also be familiar with us as ScriptLogic. ScriptLogic was acquired by Quest, and we're now part of the Quest family. So Desktop Authority is one of the products that we'll talk about, and that now also is a Quest software product. So hopefully you're familiar with us either as ScriptLogic or as Quest Software. A couple of housekeeping items I'd like to cover. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, please enter them into the questions box in your GoToWebinar console, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. We are also recording this presentation, so if you're not able to stay on or if you'd like to share this, we'll be sending that via email next week. So never fear, we'll send that on. And we will be giving away a free iPad to one lucky attendee today. We'll do that at the end as well, so make sure you stay on. You do have to be present to win, and this is one of the new iPads with the Retina display. So if you don't have one or if you've been waiting for one, here's a good chance for you to win one. So let's move on. Give my slides a chance to move on there. There we go. So a little bit about Quest Software. Quest has divided our software solutions up into 6 major solution areas, and chances are if you're in IT, we have something that fits your needs, anything from database management to Windows Server management, performance monitoring, identity and access, data protection, and what we're calling workspace management. And I've got a little red arrow there because what we're talking about today, user configurations, application delivery, that really falls under this new umbrella that we call user workspace management, and that's a new term in the industry. It's no longer just desktop management or client management, because now what we're trying to do is meet the user's needs, and I'll go into that in a minute. But we also have these solutions that cover all these different platforms that you're dealing with that cover physical, virtual, and cloud environments. So a little bit more on user workspace management. The goal here is to meet our users' needs, and really what they want to do is they want to personalize their environments, they want to have access to what they need, and they want to utilize different devices, right? So they want to bring in their iPads, they want to use their mobile devices, they want to access things remotely. But from an IT perspective, we need to standardize our environments. We need to provision and deliver those platforms, tools, applications, etc. And we also need to be able to support that. So depending on what the user has, we don't want to have to support all these different configurations and all these different use cases if it's not something that we're doing. And this spans across applications, data, devices, desktops, peripherals, platforms, etc. And we've got to support those users wherever they are. I mean, we're not in an environment anymore where all of our users are in one office using a physical computer. They're in a hotel, they're in a home office, they're in remote offices, they're using those iPads, they're using mobile computers, they're also connecting in virtual environments as well, and we have to be able to support all that. So the whole goal of user workspace management is to give you software solutions that help you do all of that. So the speakers today, myself again, Jayson Gehri, working for Quest. I work in product marketing, and my whole goal is basically to evangelize these solutions to the IT community and basically educate everybody on what our products can do for them and how we have different solutions that fit into the different needs that you have in the IT community. And then we also have Greg Shields. I'm sure you all have heard of Greg. He works for, or is a senior partner with Concentrated Technology, but he's been all over the place. He's been a contributing editor for TechNet Magazine, Redmond Magazine. He's also been a speaker at a lot of conferences like Tech Mentor, TechEd, VMworld. He is a Microsoft MVP and a VMware vExpert. So I feel, Greg, that you're very well experienced and positioned to talk about this topic, right?
I hope so.
Otherwise, what are we doing here?
Exactly. You've set me up.
I've set you up, yes. Well, we'll be setting you up all throughout this presentation. So, let's get into the meat of it. I think you've got something for our attendees. I don't know how many of you have attended these presentations before. You can type into your questions box if you've been to one of these ScriptLogic, Quest, Greg Shields presentations. But Greg's got something new for you today.
Yeah, so this time I'm prepared, honestly, Jayson. So we've done these before, and if you have participated in any of these webinars that Jayson seems to get me on for, there always is this sort of back and forth agenda that goes on where Jayson has an idea that he wants me to try to show you how to accomplish something using Windows and the native tools. And then Jayson, of course, says, well, that's just nice, but watch how much easier this is with our products. And so this time I mean business, because this time we're not doing any slides. We're not doing death by PowerPoint. We're going to focus on how you can actually accomplish these use cases, both in Windows and also using these ScriptLogic tools. And I think with the goal of helping you figure out, well, which one makes more sense for you. Am I right, Jayson?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not everybody has the flexibility to purchase a solution, but they do have these tools in their Windows environments, and I think it makes sense to show them both ways so that if they ever have the option of using a piece of software like Desktop Authority, they can see the difference between what they're doing, natively. And it's not just about what you can't do, but just really how you do it. And I guess as part of that, we're going to be switching the screens back and forth, so you'll have to bear with us as, we change that around. But, we don't want to kill you with PowerPoint. We really just want to show you how to do this stuff. So,
and I should also add, too, that we are doing this completely unscripted at this time. We have a kind of an idea what we're going to try to do today, but so also bear with us if we go, ooh, wait, you actually got me this time, because this one we're doing it live.
We're doing it live, and I think that's part of the benefit of something like this event where, we're not just trying to plow through a bunch of bullet points, but really just trying to organically cover this topic. So as the first point, Greg, I think the first use case I'd like to talk about is really how do you target different configurations in group policy or group policy preferences? Because group policy preferences came out when Server 2008 came out, right? Right
around that period of time. And group policy preferences actually added. It's kind of funny. With group policy preferences, it's like it's a completely different thing that just happens to also fall under the umbrella of group policy. So they're, depending on where your setting exists, if it's something that exists in more classic group policy versus something that is more of a customized control that you would create with group policy preferences, there are two very different mechanisms that you would use for deploying that setting. In fact, Jayson, if you hand over control here, I've got a little demo environment set up where I can show people kind of what the differences are between how you would go about doing this in either of these two options. And if I go over here, right there, can you see my screen?
Yes, yep, I can see it.
So I've got a little domain controller here, dc.company.pri, and I've put together just a little organizational unit structure so you could take a look at how your OU structure might look. I mean, one of the big benefits of OUs is that they're really intended for IT, right? The OU structure is something that you as an IT pro, as the administrator, actually set up in order to just get objects separated out into whatever groups that make sense for you. My groups here, for example, have people in Denver and Las Vegas and Omaha, but yours might be separated by function, so marketing people versus sales people versus whatever. It's, again, one of the power here, the big reasons why OUs exist is simply so that I can actually distribute those things out. Now, if you haven't played with group policy and group policy preferences all that much, the process you go through in order to deploy out different settings is very different depending on what kind of setting you're attempting to accomplish. If I have a preference here, so let's say I have this group policy object, and we'll talk more about deployment here in just a minute, but I have this group policy object that I want to use to deploy out, for example, Adobe Acrobat, and at the same time I also want to configure a registry setting. Well, I can configure that registry setting here inside of the Preferences half by looking at the preferences, obviously for computer configuration. This registry this location for registry, because its computer configuration is going to target each key local machine. And then from there, what I need to do is identify what the value is that I need to set. And then for the targeting over here under the Common tab is where I can say where I want this to apply. So I only want this registry setting to apply when the file acrord32.exe actually exists on the system. So this is, a neat way you can do it with group policy preferences. Now, interestingly enough, because the preferences system is somewhat different than the policy system, the preferences in group policy preferences are targeted by the individual preference. So if you need to go through and, make multiple different preferences, well, you have to go and create different targeting characteristics for each individual preference. Now, that actually merges with the group policy setting, which is what we see here back in the group policy management console. I actually target these group policies first and foremost by assigning them to an organizational unit. And then after assigning them to an organizational unit, I can then further, for example, here's the workstations OU, I can then further target them down by either security filters here, groups, users, and computers, or I can create a custom WMI filter that will constrain it even further. So these WMI filters, if it's a group policy, you'll actually have to construct yourself, because the WMI filters are a text-based query that queries against your WMI structure on the systems that you're attempting to work with. So if I query root/simv2 and identify out the different WMI classes, like Win32 operating system, for example, and all the different columns in that database, I can ultimately construct this little WMI filter that will allow me to target this GPO in the way that I need to. So the options are there. But as you can imagine, trying to actually edit these filters can get a little cumbersome here. Just, if I make a mistake here and use a curly bracket instead of a straight bracket, or a product type equal to 2 instead of a 1, that gets a little bit more difficult. How about you, Jayson? How do things work in Desktop Authority?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take back the presenter control, and, one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking about that, Greg, is, let's say we wanted to target configurations for our marketing group, and this marketing group is worldwide, so depending on how your OUs are structured, they could belong to your North America OU, your Europe OU, your APJ OU, but then they also still need to be in a separate marketing group so that you can target those configurations to all of them, or do you have to do it individually in each OU they belong to and kind of replicate that targeting?
Well, one would assume that there are various ways that you could accomplish that. The hardest part happens in an organizational unit structure. An object, so a computer object or a user object, can exist in one and only one OU. So if you go about denormalizing your OUs and you have one for North America users and one for EMEA users and another one for marketing people, well, the object that is that person's user object can only sit in one of those.
Okay.
If you need that person to be in different OUs, well, you just really can't do that.
Got it. So this is Desktop Authority. Some of you may be familiar with it, some may not. This is actually version 9, and in version 9, one of the major changes is we now have a web console. So it's a little less cumbersome and easier to use, so you don't have to install a local fat client on your machine or anything. But beyond that, similar to what you saw when Greg showed group policy, we have different configurations for a computer and a user, and we've got these elements kind of divided up based on what makes the most sense. So, on your computer side, things that apply to the computer are, software you're deploying, updates that you have to apply, registry settings, wake on LAN, etc. And then when you get into the user, we go a bit more granular to things like all the elements that you manage in a configuration, like your registry settings that have to follow the user around, drive mappings, Microsoft Outlook settings, etc., etc. So you're going to see a lot of similarities between group policy preferences and what's in Desktop Authority. But where we get a little bit different again is I can do things by different groups that are not related to the Active Directory or the OU structure. So you see I have all these elements down here, and there's 30, 40 different elements that are similar to what you're going to see in group policy preferences, and I can set them up individually, but I can also set them up at a group level. So I've just taken this marketing group, and you see that I've got all this different targeting that's available that is not specific to my OU settings. I don't have to have a marketing OU to apply this. So what that means is if I want to configure something like a folder redirection or a drive mapping or something like that, I don't have to do it, the targeting individually. I can do it under this group setting. So I can say, hey, I want to map the marketing drive under the marketing group, and it's the same kind of setup. I give the path, I give the drive letter, I say what I want it to show up as in Explorer, but then now I can say I want this to apply to desktops. I don't want it to apply to any servers. I want this to be mapped at logon, obviously, because it doesn't do us any good if it's mapped at logoff. But I also can say things like, hey, if this person is connecting through a VMware session or a Citrix session, I still want to map this drive for them, and it doesn't matter to me if they're on a 32 or a 64-bit system. And these are very easy. I don't have to worry about filters or anything. I can just click a checkbox or unclick a checkbox. And then again, this allows me to kind of set this setting up. So with group policy preferences, like Greg said, some things are inside the preferences and some things are outside. So you have to think about, okay, I'm going to apply targeting inside group policy preferences, or I'm going to use a WMI filter. And then there's two different methods that you're doing. And then if you have to troubleshoot how that's set up and why it's not working, it can be a little bit more tricky than doing it here, where you have one set of targeting criteria that you can apply equally no matter what you're working on, and you can do it at this profile level so that you're not worrying about making sure that your targeting is identical for each individual element. Does that make sense to you, Greg?
Yeah, it kind of does. And in fact, there's something that came to my mind as you were talking about this, which is it's a common complaint that I hear from people about group policy. It's actually surprising to me. So, group policy has been around now for, 12 years, almost 13 years at this point, and I still find myself on a regular basis just surprised at how few organizations are using a technology like group policy. It surprises me, and I recently realized that for a lot of people, one of the big problems is that group policy is kind of considered to be under the umbrella of Active Directory. And whereas that makes a lot of sense because group policy and Active Directory are kind of the same thing, what a consequence of that is that while group policy and preferences really is kind of best suited for managing the desktops in an environment, it tends to be, the group policy objects tend to be managed by the server admins. So the people doing the desktops don't have access to the tools because it's Active Directory, which needs to be managed by the server admins. So I can kind of see how kind of abstracting that means that you can deploy what you need, but without having to worry about who's responsible for what.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about another use case, we talked about deploying applications, and this is something that everybody faces. How do you get the right applications to the right people without having to obviously go to each computer and install it, which isn't what we want to do. We have the ability, I believe, in GPSI to deploy applications, but think about this. We have a version of Adobe Reader that we want to get out to our Windows 7 users on our 64-bit systems because there's a different version of this MSI package for this specific environment versus our other users. How are you going to do that in group policy versus, that's really it. How are you going to do it in group policy? And I'll give you control there so you can show that.
I'll have to think about that one here for just a second because so I have a package where I need to get Adobe Acrobat deployed out to a series of users, and maybe I have two different use cases for different configurations. So let's say here, for example, I have this group policy object that called install Acrobat Reader, but allow update, and then another one that says don't allow update. So maybe in this case, I have some users that tend to be out on the road, and because they're out on the road, I want them to be allowed to update it whenever they want. But for the people that are back here in the office, well, I probably want to do it myself because then I can kind of control the update. Well, what's kind of challenging here is that the installation of a thing happens in a different location than any of the customizations of that thing. So back here into my install Acrobat Reader GPO that I've created, under policies and then software settings is this software installation, or what we think of as GPSI for group policy software installation. First, I have to have the MSI. Right, so I've got to have Adobe Reader, which, I don't know, the last time I downloaded it, Adobe Reader was actually a .exe. So I have to actually first figure out how to extract the .msi out of the .exe, which can involve various different tactics, and there's a whole series of breadcrumbs that you can use to extract one from the other. Then once you have it, well, then I simply just add it in here as an MSI, and then this piece of software will deploy to any computers that receive this GPO, that receive this group policy object. So if I take this group policy object and then send it, drag it over here to my workstation's OU, well, then I can make sure that all the items that are in that workstation's OU will get that installation. It only happens at at power on. So the user may have to reboot their computer once or sometimes even twice for them to receive that GPO and to actually install software. If I wanted to target it down even further, well, then I have to go through some pretty interesting machinations with either setting security filtering here. So instead of choosing authenticated users, the read and apply group policy, maybe a set of computers, for example, or using, again, one of these WMI filters here that say, based off of the characteristics in WMI that the target machine is saying it has, well, okay, well, if you meet all these in the query, then go ahead and apply the policy. Obviously, if I have different things here, well, then I need to have different policies, one for allow update and one for don't allow update, or maybe even split these out into an install and then a configure. But doing this requires a little bit of work in putting them in the right places as it relates to OUs.
So that sounds a little complicated. So I think I get it. Basically, you have to set up these different GPOs depending on exactly what you want to do, and you're really using this WMI filter to gather the data to decide exactly which computers receive those either software updates or software installations, right?
Oh, yeah, yes, and in fact, so give me control back because I want to show how you can actually figure out what the contents of that, so what that WMI filter is. So you might be looking at this and saying, well, all right, so great, Greg, you created this thing called Windows 7 x64. Now twice you've shown me this piece of code, for lack of a better term, that you've somehow constructed. Well, all right, well, where do you get that information? How did you know that, you can go to Win32 operating? What is Win32 operating system? Maybe another question too. Really having kind of a deep understanding of the WMI database and all the different classes. This Win32 operating system is what we call a class in the database. Comes in handy for helping you figure out what kind of data you can actually pull out of those classes. This is a tool called WMI Sim Studio, which I believe is one of the oldest tools that still work within Windows. You can download it off of Microsoft.com. But what this lets you do is in a fairly reasonable graphical view here, look at the different characteristics of the WMI database. You can see here, some of the different classes that exist: Win32 Server Session and Sim Service and things like this, Win32 Share. If I do a query here on operating system, I should actually find Win32_operating system. And then with the results from that, I can take a look at the different columns in the database and then the instances of data that exist in those columns to try to figure out exactly what kind of data, in what format I need to create that WMI query. So over here on the right-hand side is essentially all the properties that exist in this class. These are the columns in that database. And if I choose the View Instance button here, you'll see that I can actually scroll across to find, for example, OS architecture, which I know because I've found it here. The OS architecture is 64-bit, so exactly those characters in that string. So I know that by taking a look at this data, how I need to ultimately go about constructing this WMI query. So there's my way. What's your way?
Okay, so let's switch it back over here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go back into the computer section of our configuration, and I'm going to do something similar to that you did and go under our desktops group. And again, I can apply the same we call it validation logic targeting, as I do anywhere else inside Desktop Authority. So I have the same options here that I've had before, but I'm going to go in our desktop group and go under MSI packages. And this is really where we're going to deploy the software using Desktop Authority. And you see that I have a couple already set up, but let's use Adobe Reader since that's what you were talking about. So I've already selected the package that I want to deploy. I can actually not only install this, but I can also decide to uninstall it for machines as well if I want to do that. I can also apply transform files. So if I need to transform this MSI in any way to fit my environment, I can actually add that here. And I don't have to worry about doing that separately or coming up with another way of applying the transform file. So when we go back to the targeting, you were talking about things like WMI filters and whatnot. What's great about Desktop Authority, and some people are pro agents, some people are against agents, but we actually deploy agents to all of the managed devices that we're talking about. So that could be laptops, desktops, VMware environments, Citrix environments, etc. So we're not pulling this data through WMI, but actually through the agent. So you know exactly all of the things that are going on in this machine. We don't have to worry about classes and data formats and all that, but I can literally, again, just select desktop. I want this to be on my Windows 7 machines. I want to apply it to my non-virtual machines, so my physical machines, because my server guys are actually going to apply this update themselves in their VMware and Citrix environment. And I want to make sure that this gets into my 64-bit environment. So that's exactly what I need to do to figure out what this targeting is. I don't have to worry about classes and looking up values and all that. But in addition to that, let me get back in there, I also have some options, and I'm not sure if you have this in GPSI, but I can give the user a message on their machine saying, hey, we're about to install this software package. I can also ask permission. If I want to, if this is a non-critical update, I can allow the user to postpone this installation or update. Or I can say, hey, we're not going to give them permission. This is a critical security patch. I'm just going to install it and they can deal with it. Now, one of the things that you said is that in GPSI, you're going to install at power on. Well, for me, I don't know that I want to do that because I don't want my user sitting there for 10, 15, 20 minutes depending on how long the install takes. So I can decide to apply this update at shutdown. So when they decide they want to log off or shut their computer off, before that actually happens, we're going to apply this update or apply this installation. Or I can decide that I want to schedule it, let's say at 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning, I can do that. And since we also have the ability to wake on LAN using our agents, I can wake those computers up if they've been shut down or put to sleep so that we can apply this update. So that gives me, it seems, a bit more of an option and a lot easier way to apply the targeting than what you were talking about, I think, Greg.
Yeah, you can go in either direction, too. There's a lot of flexibility here, but gosh, this is really hard. And one of the hardest parts about targeting with WMI queries is the fact that you really do, you make a syntax error in there, and it becomes very, very challenging to dig through event logs to try to figure out exactly why your GPOs are not being applied to the various objects inside of your organizational unit structure. So I can see your point in that having something that's very simple kind of eliminates the oops errors that is in many ways what adds all the extra time in deploying things and then configuring them once they get deployed.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the time I was looking at to try to figure out, I have to use the sim tool to look up the value and figure out the syntax, and then I have to type up the query, and then if it didn't work, I have to figure out what I did wrong, and it doesn't seem the most intuitive versus, with this validation logic, I'm just kind of like point, click, and done, which is what we used to use as our tagline, because that really is that simple in this type of product.
I should add too. Will you go back for just a minute? And you were talking about all the different things that you could, the additional options that were available when you were deploying out a piece of software.
Yep.
So one of the things you have to kind of be conscious of is that group policy software installation is kind of designed as a minimally acceptable solution for deploying software. There is no reporting. There is no permissions asking. It only happens at either power on or login. If you try to deploy it to users, the users generally need to be admins in order to install the software, which is not a great thing either. So you have really a very limited, almost no real way of identifying where software ended up and what the success is without doing a lot of machine-by-machine querying to figure out what went wrong or what went right.
Right, and with Desktop Authority, you don't have to worry about administrator rights, etc., because you're really installing this with administrator privileges from the product versus the user itself. And not only do we have the ability to provide those options on a computer basis, but we also have different users. So for your more technical users, you can, again, give them the ability to defer the packages, or you can take that away. So it's not just at the computer level, but based on the type of user, you can give them different options as well and use that same type of targeting to determine what users get the ability to defer an installation and how many times and how much time do you give them to respond, or do you completely hide all the indicators and just do the installation and not even give them the option or the visibility into what's happening. So again, we have that ability to do those configurations and targeting at the computer level and at the user level. So kind of moving on to the next use case. So we talked about installing applications, but the whole thing about delivering applications isn't just the application itself. We have to worry about things like updates and patches, and not just for Microsoft applications, but for all these third-party applications in our environment as well. How do you do that using group policy or those tools, Greg?
Well, deploying out packages using the group policy software installation kind of happens in much the same way that it happens with deploying out, the original package. So GPSI has the ability to, if I go back here to my install Acrobat Reader, has the ability to deploy out MSIs. And then if I take a look here, I think, gosh, it's been a long time since I've done an MSP to an existing MSI, the one that's already been approved. Because the modification screen here actually doesn't allow me to add any MSTs. I can do upgrades here that the packages that this package will upgrade, but that's kind of the opposite of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the package to something to upgrade. So classically, I think with updates, a lot of times what you have to do here is really just create another GPO in many cases. It also keeps things cleaner in the interface than trying to do too much from within the package metadata itself. I guess I'll admit, right, inside of group policy and GPSI, the options to accomplish this task really aren't that easy. Okay.
But, and I've seen a couple of people post this question. That is something that if you're committed enough to deploy like System Center, that's something that System Center can do for you, right?
So if you have a System Center product, yeah, System Center is kind of, let me take a step back. So a lot of people, when they think of a software installation, we have kind of gotten used to the notion that we hit next, finish, and that software gets installed. But there's really no magic going on when that occurs. The MSI is just simply a convenient database that one can use for giving the instructions for where to put files and where to put registry entries. A software installation is just a bunch of file copies and registry changes. So whether you are using a configuration manager or you are using a GPSI or even a Desktop Authority, what we're doing is just executing an MSI, or even in the cases of software that can accomplish that, like Desktop Authority or Config Manager, these are just simply running an EXE, or running an MSI, and making sure that executable happens in a way that fits within the use case of the user using the machine.
Okay, got it. Okay, so let me show you kind of what an update looks like in Desktop Authority, because we do have a part of the product specifically that does patch deployment. And for someone who may not have SCCM or may not want to use group policy, this could be a pretty good option for them, because again, it makes it very simple to look at and apply these types of patches. So we have a database that we pull from that's not just Microsoft, but a lot of third-party software that we can pull updates and patches from. And we get things like the security updates and the severity, like critical, et cetera, et cetera. So you can go through and look for these updates in our database. So again, I'm looking at Adobe Reader here, and I've already selected the update that I want to apply, but I have this whole database of updates that I can apply. So it's very easy for me to search for and look for those updates. And again, I have these options about when I want to apply it and how I want to apply it. So again, I can either let the user know what's going to happen or not, give them the ability to postpone that update or not, and I don't have to just apply that at startup or power up. I can do it at shutdown, when we refresh the settings, or we can schedule it again for the middle of the night when we don't expect anybody to be working. But I also have the really easy validation logic type targeting, which again is just point and click, and I can apply this to my desktops. I can apply it. This update may only be for Windows 7. Maybe I don't have my server guys who are going to apply this update for me, so I can also target those VMware and Citrix environments as well. And maybe this is only a 64-bit, patch. I can do that here and save that without doing a lot of the creating a separate GPO and figuring out what OU to put it in, et cetera, et cetera. So that becomes pretty simple to do. And again, I can do this for third-party applications. I can do it in different languages. So in our database, we have the ability to select, different patches for different language installations. So you see here, for a lot of the English, French, German, Spanish, I can do different updates as well. I can look at the different severities. I can look at the different patch types, etc. And I can also select distribution servers, so I'm not doing it all from, say, my domain controller. I can select different servers that are closer to the desktops that are downloading the updates and taking less load off my network. I can set the reboot if we need to restart after the installation, so that when someone comes in, their computer has already been restarted. They don't have to wait for that to happen before they can start working. And again, like I said, we have those different options for the users and the computers as well. So there's a lot of flexibility to set the way the patch or the update is applied, versus I believe what you were saying, Greg, is it's basically just the minimal set of tools that you would need to basically deploy that patch out, right?
You kind of consider them to be essentially an additional application install.
Okay, so you don't treat it differently as an update or a patch. It's really, okay, we just need to deploy this application again.
Indeed.
Okay, that makes sense. So basically my goal was to kind of show you what this looked like inside Desktop Authority, and maybe how it was a little bit easier and a little bit more granular. And for people who may or may not have been using group policy and group policy preferences in the past, they can see what some of the differences are, and hopefully they've walked away with some ways that they can do this using group policy preferences and group policy software installation. But maybe also what the brighter side or the greener side of the pasture could be with a product like Desktop Authority.
Yeah, it seems to me so. One can accomplish the task using really either kind of approach, but it seems to me like what Desktop Authority does is it takes a number of the more challenging parts that are kind of intrinsic to group policy and even in preferences, and kind of just puts a little bit of a skin over the top to make those challenging parts much easier to deploy. If at the end of the day your goal is just to get the work done, well, getting the work done in the easiest, most consistent way possible, and one that can be reported on, is probably got to be the most successful, because then you can report on how successful you are.
Right, exactly. And that's the other thing that I'm not showing today, is that we do have a whole reporting suite that will tell you what deployments were successful, which ones were not, what patches were successful, etc., so that if you do need to track down those computers or those users, you can do that and you can verify that these things have been applied. And that's a whole other thing that we haven't gone into. And actually, before we close out, I just do want to touch on a couple of things. We didn't go really in-depth into Desktop Authority in this presentation because we really want to focus on configurations and applications. But Desktop Authority comes in 3 different editions based on what your needs are. If you do have an SCCM, an Altiris, a LAN desk, there's a version of this product that will complement what you already have deployed and doesn't overlap that functionality. There's a called Standard Edition, and then if you really don't have those types of deployments in your IT infrastructure, there's Professional Edition, which really comes with the full suite of features inside Desktop Authority. And what it's really meant to do is to give you granular control over things like system settings, patches, updates, and really provide that stable, secure platform that gives users the configurations and the resources that they need no matter where they're connecting. So tying it back to that user workspace message of whatever device, whatever connection type, whether it's physical, virtual, published, etc., we want to make sure that the users have what they need. And we didn't cover things like power management, really shutting down computers, enforcing sleep, enforcing a lock screen so that if somebody walks away from their computer isn't available for anybody who just walks by, or even remote support. I mean, that's a whole other area of managing desktops and configurations, that if your user has an issue, you can't walk over to the computer if they're at home or at a remote office. You have to have a way to remotely connect and fix their issues. Those are other areas of Desktop Authority we haven't covered. And I talked about DA9, Desktop Authority 9, that's the version we're showing today. In addition to this web console, we had updates we applied so that you can do things easier for Windows 7 and Office 2010, so things like folder redirection for my documents, my music, my pictures, etc. We also are able to centrally manage your internet browsers, and this is the first product that actually can centrally manage Firefox. I know we have a lot of Firefox users out there. So it can configure things like homepage, privacy settings, pop-up blockers, restricted and approved sites, etc. So again, it makes a centralized repository for all those things you need to configure inside your environment. So with that, I think we're going to basically close up here. Let you know that if you wanted to try Desktop Authority, there is a 30-day evaluation available. You can go to quest.com/desktop-authority and download a trial of the product. You can get a data sheet. There's a walkthrough tour. There's some videos. A lot of things that kind of help you explore further if you're interested. And then Greg Shields has a website at concentratedtech.com if you wanted to reach out to him. I really consider you, Greg, one of the best experts in this area, which is why I think we keep reaching out to you for these events, and I really thank you for the insight in helping us understand group policy and group policy preferences.
You make me blush.
Yeah, that's my goal.